Hello, here you can see my wallpaper that I have on my Surface Pro. I generated this using some free tools and using ArtRage, and I'm going to show you in this tutorial the process that I used to create something like this. The first free tool that I used was called Earthbound View, which is a very simple, free, quick and lightweight image editor. What I'm going to do first of all is I'm going to form the base image, which is going to be one of my paintings that I've done in ArtRage. First thing to do is to open the painting, and I'm going to open Winter Puppy, and the next step is to scale it, and I've chosen to use the scaling option of 4K because that should fit on most monitors quite nicely. This image is currently quite large, but not quite to the dimensions of 4K. As you can see, it's 3913 by 2810, and 4K is 3840 by 2160. So there are a couple of methods which can be used to scale it. The first one is probably more applicable for smaller images, where if with a smaller image you just go into image and you resize, resample, you're going to lose some detail for that because it only has a certain amount of detail to deal with. But there is an option that you can use to create tiled images, and select method 2 to set the file image dimensions to 3840 by 2160, which is the 4K. And when you do that, it just multiplies up the image. In this case, it wouldn't do because the image is already quite large. But if you had something a bit smaller, for example, if I go and find something which is a bit smaller, like this dog here, and then I go to Image, and then I go to Create Tiled Images, and then I do the same. As you can see there, it's duplicated the image to scale it up, and therefore you don't lose any detail regarding this. And it doesn't really matter. What the main aspect is that you want to maintain the painting information at a good high level at this moment in time. Okay, let's open the puppy again. And now I'm going to use method number 2, which is to resize, resample, which you can use for larger images. For example, this one is almost 4K anyway. And I need to set new size, making sure that preserve aspect ratio is off, and set it to 4K, which is 3840 by 2160, and select OK. And as you can see, it has stretched it out, but that's absolutely fine. The next step is, now I have my 4K image, I just need to save it. And I think I'll just save it to my desktop. And JPEG will be fine for this. In fact, I probably prefer it to save it in the more compressed, smaller format anyway. It makes life a bit easier for me. Okay, that is setting the base image. And now I'm going to use a tool called GIMP, which is a free and open source image editor, which is something I use alongside my ArtRage paintings to change colours and to tweak filters. Here is the opening screen, and I'm going to open the new image that I've just created, which I saved to the desktop. Winter Puppy finished. And there we go. And as you can see, I can move it around. And the aim here is to start playing around with it to form something that might look interesting regarding a wallpaper, for example. At the moment, this is potentially a bit boring, and of course it's slightly stretched as well, so it won't work too well. So what I like to do first of all is to go into filters and to set distort and the Kaleidoscope, which will start reflecting the image around. And I will have all the painterly information, the bump aspect from the original painting, which already adds it some interesting texture. And it really is just a case of playing around with these values and seeing what starts to come out, and then stopping when you get something that looks quite interesting. So at the moment there's not too much going on regarding interest, and you can get some quite weird things coming through as well. Ooh, that's interesting. Ooh, let's just play around with this a bit. Okay, I quite like that. That's something quite interesting. I will accept that. What I will then typically do here is I will duplicate the layer and then start working on that. So I already have a backup of the previous one, and then I can play around with this a little bit more. I think I might try and put it through the Kaleidoscope again. So I've got something quite interesting there initially, and now that looks quite interesting already. Let's just a bit of a play around with rotation and see what we can get. And as you can see, even small changes make a big difference. And sometimes you just know that when you come across something that it just looks interesting. You can play around with the number of mirrors as well, which is always quite interesting. I quite like that. Again, I'm going to accept that. And now may come the time to save this document, and it saves as an XCF, which is a GIMP file on the desktop. So let's save our progress. And as you can see, the two layers on the right hand side, we have the first one and then we have the second one. The second one looks much more interesting. What I'll do now is I'll duplicate the second layer and I'll carry on working on it. Now I may have done enough Kaleidoscope stuff. Maybe the time to start playing around with colours, I think. Let's go into colours, and what should we go for? Let's go for colour balance initially, and just play around with the shadows, mids and the highlights to see. I quite like the colours anyway, but you never know, I may be able to come along something different. Just again playing around with things, seeing what looks interesting. Don't think that's really working too well on the mids. I quite like pushing the reds a bit more on the low end. I think I might accept that, and let's see what I can do on the highlights. Anything interesting? Not really. I think that's okay. Let's tweak the colours very slightly, and let's try and invert the colours a bit to see if I get anything interesting. Wow, that's interesting, but not particularly nice. And let's try and invert in a slightly different way. Another quite interesting, but I don't really like it. And go and try and, ooh, that looks quite interesting. And as you can see, when you zoom in, you've got a lot of textual information there. But we will improve that on that later on when we can start using ArtRage and start overlaying and using blend modes. This is just forming some base images at the moment, which we can use. I think I might, although the color I don't quite like, I like the aspect of the invert. And actually I may just duplicate that. It's kind of okay. But I want to play around with the colors a bit, I think. And let's go for hue chroma. Therefore, this is going to change the hue. This is a filter that is found in ArtRage, and it's quite an extreme change typically. But I think that might work with something. Although not necessarily. I don't really like anything I'm seeing there. And of course you can increase the saturation, which is the chroma. Just seeing if anything interesting may come out. Don't think there's too much interest there. And you can reset all these settings with the reset button as well to go back to the start. I can change, turn it to black and white if I want to by changing the saturation. Don't think there's anything interesting there. What should we try now? Let's try equalize and seeing if we get anything interesting. Ooh, I quite like that. It seems to have added a sheen of detail on and softened the colours slightly. As you can see now, we're starting to get the idea of a background. Some interesting kaleidoscopic things going on and some quite interesting colours. I'll just save it there and let's duplicate the layer again. Maybe we'll go to Kaleidoscope again, seeing if we can bring anything interesting out. I quite like that. That's quite a nice star in the middle type thing. Let's see if zooming out would actually, because that tends to add in some more detail. I quite like that. I think that's a little bit better. And I think we're almost there for this stage, which as you zoom in, we've got quite a lot of detail going on. And I may just try and try the inverts again. See if I get anything interesting. No, that's not too interesting. And linear invert. Ooh, I like that. I like that. You just kind of know when there's something that you like. But I always just like that as a wallpaper, to be perfectly honest. I will save there. And I think I'm happy with what we've done. So what we've got here on the right hand side is we've got all these different layers with all these different steps that we've gone through using our almost gut instinct from the base layer all the way up. So we've gone from that, which was our first step, all the way up to the top, which is that. As I said, that already looks like quite a nice background. The next step is to export all these layers, each one as an individual file. And the way to do this is you need to export this file, this GIMP file, as a certain format. And to do that, you go into Export As, and you select the file type, and it gives you a list here of all the different file types. And you need to search for ORA, which is a raster format. And when you export as that, it will be exporting, as you can see, it's an open raster, it will be exporting the layer information. Select export, and it'll take a bit of time because it will be exporting every single layer. As you can see, there is a status bar at the bottom where it's doing the export for each individual layer. But this will be really useful when we're importing into ArtRage and then playing around and overlaying blend modes and textures and things on top. Okay, that is GIMP used. Now it's time to extract out the file that we've just saved. The OR file we have now just saved to the desktop, which, as you can see, is here, winterpuppyfinish.ora. And what we want to do now is we want to right click on it and we want to extract out this file because it is zipped up and all the images related to all the layers are zipped up. You can use any zip file manager to do this. I have 7-zips installed on my machine and therefore I'm going to use that, and I'm going to extract to the directory, which didn't take too long, as you can see. And when you go into there, it's created a directory called winterpuppyfinished, and if you select there and then you go to data, for each of the layers, as you can see here, it has exported an image, which is really useful. So we open that up. As you can see, that's our final layer that we created there, and you can cycle through there and you can see that you have a PNG related to each layer that you've created, which is really useful. So you have something like a base at the moment. For example, if I just wanted to set this as a background, the last layer that we generated, I could just right click and I could just set to background, and there we have it. So already we have a background that we've managed to create, but what we want to do now is we want to open up ArtRage and we want to start playing around and overlaying various different textures on top and seeing what we can get. If you select File and then you import image file, the file that is importing will create an ArtRage document of the same size. If we now go to Desktop and we go to winterpuppyfinished and Data, we can select which one we want. What should we go for? Let's go for this one here. Our document will now be at a 4K size, and let's create a new layer on top and set the blend mode to overlay and use the bucket tool and use the texture tab, the pattern tab, to select an image of a pattern. For example, at the moment it's set to a pattern I've got here, but if I select, for example, we have a collection which is built into ArtRage anyway, and therefore I can select any of these. I'm not sure if we're going to get anything interesting out of them. For example, if I go for checkers and then on my overlay layer I just pull it down. Oh, actually that's not too bad. As you can see, the overlay is making the light aspects slightly lighter and the dark is darker, and you can clearly see the checkers have been overlaid there. Actually, that's not too bad. That's not too bad for an idea regarding that. It's maybe just influencing the underlying colours a bit too much. So what you can do on the right hand side is go to layer, and you've got the opacity here and you can change it up or down. Just to kind of maybe move it down a bit, and the eye on and off to see what effect it has. So it does have an effect and it makes it a bit more interesting. I kind of quite like that. So what I'm going to do now is, because I like it, I'm just going to export. I'm going to export the image. So if you go to File and then Export Image File, you can then export to a new name, and I will call it Wallpaper 1 and save that. Okay, let's try a different fill. Let's try a different from collection for the moment and see. Let's go for a decorative fill. Maybe gold glitter looks quite interesting. and just see if anything happens. Okay, that's changed the color, but we may want to just increase the opacity on that layer so things come through a bit more. It's not coming through too much. Let's try and change the blend layer to something more distinctive, for example, difference. Difference and exclusion give you vast differences, and actually I kind of quite like that again. That's quite an interesting background. What I'll do is I will export that as well. Let's export the image and save it as Wallpaper 2. Okay. Yes, I quite like that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add another layer on top of that. And I think I'm going to set this to a color layer. And I'm going to set the fill tool to a flat fill. And let's try just an orange color and that. And as you can see, that is just a block fill. I'm not sure if that really looks particularly interesting, but that gives us flexibility by changing the opacity to change the color. And of course, what you can do, of course, is that you can start changing blend modes to see what happens when you start doing that. If you're not too happy with the original color, you can start changing this quite a lot and seeing if there's something that may look quite interesting. Not sure if that's really going to work too well, to be perfectly honest. Although that looks quite interesting. Just dialing that down with these kind of things, you can get something that looks interesting. I quite like that. That's all right. That's not too bad. So therefore you have got the combination of a color layer. You've got this layer here, which is the texture layer, and then you have your underlying image which you've created, which is still coming through quite nicely. I think I'll actually export that one out as well. Let's export that image. And of course, we will call this Wallpaper 3. Okay, now you are in ArtRage. We have this layer here. We might just want to play around with maybe a gradation of a fill. So here I have a complementary color. And let's try and go for that and see what happens. That's quite interesting. Let's try and change the fill type. Yes, that's not bad. I kind of quite like that. And of course, you can just keep doing this and seeing what interesting things you get. I quite like that. And let's try on this layer, let's try and overlay something different. For example, if we go to here, before we were selecting from collection, let's try and load something from disk. And let's go into some patterns that I have created from my camera and see if anything will work. And let's try this. This is just a complete guess. I don't know whether it'll work or whether it won't. That's weird. Not much really happened. Let's turn this layer off here. Whoa. There's certainly a difference. You've got the green coming through quite a lot. And there'll be a bit of extra detail there as well with the texture. Let's try some other things. Let's try some different blend modes. Ooh, that's quite interesting. And of course you can move these layers around as well and play around with the blend modes in different orders to see if anything interesting might come out. And then you can change the opacity, of course. That looks quite interesting. And let's just put this one in again. Just play around with. As you can see, you can get some quite interesting things going on here. Let's just change this maybe to a different blend mode. Or maybe let's try and load another texture in, see what happens. Let's try this rocky one. And let's try, that's overlay, that's probably okay. That looks moderately interesting. And maybe it's a bit too much. You could just dial it down a bit. Yeah, okay, that's not too bad. I kind of like that. And you still have this pattern, and you can pull it through as much as you want to as well. Okay, I think that's reasonable. Let's export that. To wallpaper 4. And I think that'll be our final wallpaper. And this will be the end of the tutorial, I think. Let's go and just actually set it, see how it looks. There we go, we have it there exported, and if we just right click and set as desktop background, there we go. We have a weird textual background that can be used. Okay, that's the end of the tutorial to show you how to create a wallpaper for your desktop using some free tools on Windows and using ArtRage to add in the final textures. Okay, I hope you found this helpful. Thank you. Bye.